Thank you, Ms. Mead. We are back live after our short break there at 7:45 here. Thank you for being on time, everybody. So before we go any further, the next part of our discussion on page 12 begins with aquatics and goes down to department efficiencies. To make sure we're clear, I want to make sure that council has potentially some questions, and I'm not sure where they fall in the category of our discussion here. So if any councilors have any questions that are unsure about where to ask them, let's ask them right now and make sure we don't miss them. What we've already gone through, or we know they're coming up sometime later in the discussion. If any councilors have any questions, if they're not sure when to ask them, let's just do it now. A couple of newer councilors have a couple of questions, they're not sure when to ask them. So I'd rather get them on the table now and make sure we get them addressed for them before we go back onto the aquatics and going down page 12. Councilor Telebus, Nathan, you have the floor.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. I think I'm okay for now, just as long as I get clarification that it doesn't negate my ability to ask some of these questions after. Obviously, if we run into a scenario where there's a motion, I appreciate I'll have to speak up, but prior to that, I can ask these.
Okay, if you're comfortable,
yeah.
No, I'm fine with that.
Perfect. Thank you.
We'll come back and anytime you got a question, make sure everyone's got their questions answered and you're comfortable with the process. So, all right, council, having said that, we'll continue on going down page 12. And next on the list, as I mentioned, is aquatics, utilities, lease space, department adjustment, and department efficiencies. And with that, I'll open up the questions from members of council going forward. Councilor Swain, you have the floor first. Sam?
Yeah, thanks. And I think several councillors asked this question around the increase here in aquatics, 331,000. The response we got back is for the amount for casual wages. So I guess my question is pretty straightforward. Does this 331,000, does this give us access to new swimming lessons? Or is this to kind of maintain where we're at?
Mr. DeBlanco?
Sure, I'll take a crack, and if I get it wrong, Mr. Suter will correct me. My understanding is this is to maintain existing services based on the demand that we're seeing at aquatics.
So I heard that, I read that in the response, but I struggle if we're maintaining, right, to get 11 or whatever casual folks in, if we're maintaining our existing lessons, we're getting 11 new people to come in, but we don't get any new lessons. The math doesn't make sense to me.
Mr. Suter, you have a microphone I can turn on for you, or can you reach someone to reach to you?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. For example, we've added 2,000 more swimming lessons. 2,000 more children have been gone through lessons this year. So the demand has been increasing since we reopened. The budget that was initially has been in place for the last several years was the same budget we had with Aquafit. When we closed, we anticipated what we were running then would be the same amount. It has obviously exceeded our expectations. We've underfunded it in the budget. Thankfully, the revenues have offset some of this over the last 2 years, but we're trying to write the budget so that we're showing a true reflection of cost of operating what we're delivering now.
Yeah, perfect. So what I heard is there's more people going to swimming lessons and we need to pay for it. And I'm good with that. I just, what I saw here was spending $330,000 and not getting anything, but we're paying for all the additional people going through swimming lessons. So I'm good with that. Thank you. No questions on that particular item.
Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate that. Councillor Barnhart, you're next. Kathy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Similar, don't go away, Mr. Suter. We just like to hear from you. So the revenue that's coming in doesn't cover these agile positions. And part of me is wondering what happened there, because there was something as well in the report we saw last night around what happened actually with the casual staff not being hired in time or something to that effect. I wish I had brought that document with me. But you were under budget last year. And so now this is a bump up of another 331. So it seems to me that some of the revenue that we received should be going towards this expense. Is there any way you can cut that back?
Thanks for the question. We've been running this short in casual wages for 2 years running. So that amount, I'll let Mr. DeBlanco speak to where that's been covered off from to balance the budget at the end of the year. Because we have, like I say earlier, we budgeted based on what we saw when we shut down, when we reopened, then we reopened during the pandemic. It was a slow pickup, and then we've had 2 full years now of this level of providing this level of service to meet the demand. And that's what the true cost of the casual wages are to meet the programs, both in terms of lessons
And
and
why
programs.
casual? Just to give us the rationale for that. I think I know what it is, but why are you going the casual route instead of a full-time?
The bulk of our aquatic staff is casual / part-time. Yeah,
So
that's
these-
just how we can operate it. It's very difficult to hire full-time aquatic staff. We
these
only
are
have a couple of
instructors and
them. Yes,
lifeguards?
yes.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It
Sort of.
does. I was hoping for something else, but magic, I was hoping.
Well, Mr. Blanco might have some context on
From the
financial side of
report
it,
From
but-
last night on the third quarter results from September 30th, there was a comment in there about the recreation budget, why it was underspent. And I believe it talked about the aquatics.
Sure, thanks for the question. So it was overspent was the
It was
term.
overspent.
So this would be correct. This
So this is the. correct-
adjustment here reflects so that that variance that we saw in last night's presentation wouldn't exist.
Okay, yeah, the pluses and minuses had me confused. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Counselor. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Blanco, Mr. Suter. Any further questions? We were on aquatics for 2 questions. Any further questions on the aquatics ask in the operating budget? Seeing none, I'll go down to utilities, lease space, department adjustment, or department efficiencies. Any questions, comments, concerns from members of council on those 4 last categories in this section of page 12 in operating? Seeing none, okay. Then we are moving right down the list then. So we are now, just so we're on the page here, we're net maintaining services at 7.03%. We now go down to the next line, which is service experience office at 204,000, 0.80. I do believe some counselors asked that question in their asked questions and answers were given. Anybody require any additional clarification on this particular item that is looking at an increase of 0.8% in operating? Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, Kat. Anybody have any questions about this specific line item, service experience office? Many counselors did ask questions in the written answers, but if you require any clarification on it, now would be a good time to have one last crack at any clarification on this particular item that does add 0.8% to operating. To the tax levy. Yeah, to the tax levy. Yes, that's part of operating, correct. Okay, seeing none, I appreciate that. Next on the line is RCMP staffing contract. Many of us also asked clarifying questions, and Mr. Blanco did, in his opening remarks, talk about the RCMP contract retroactively in the federal government. Our 2 new RCMP officers that council ordered last year. I will make a comment in my questions was, in our past experience, the RCMP, when we asked new officers, took 18 months to 2 years to arrive. We anticipated this past April when we added the request for 2 new officers to have them come sometime, probably 12 months to 18 months down the road. We're very fortunate. Both officers, one is already here and one is well on the way, well above the anticipated schedule, which is why they're part of the 2024 operating budget instead of 2025. That will allow for future increased policing in Beaumont and better safety for our residents. And we'll also maintain our RCMP officer to population ratio. 2 officers will make sure our ratio stays where it needs to be and not get out of hand if we get too many people and too few officers, that ratio goes the wrong way. This will help us with that achievement. And that 2.6 is essentially, I don't want to call it a fixed cost, but we don't have a lot of room on that. So I'll call it a fixed cost for lack of a better way to explain it. I'm assuming no questions from council on that, other than the written answer we've already received. Okay, next we have projected assessment growth of $1 million, which does provide a negative number, which is to the good. It reduces our tax increase requirement by 3.93%. I do believe some members of council may have some questions on that. I believe, Sam, you have a question. So Sam, you have the floor on this particular issue.
Yes, thank you. And just to get council situated here, if you refer to question 74 in the written questions here, that's probably not going to help because they're not quite in order, but written question number 74. Good luck finding it. Maybe control F. Yeah. It's page 12. So I'm not going to help you. Sorry. Yeah, my questions. Okay. My question is around projected assessment growth, right? We arrived at $1 million for projected assessment growth. That's a very round, nice number. In the spirit of trying to bring this 6.49, I've got several ideas. Make sure I say ideas. And this is my first one. With regards to growth, and I'll point people to the last point of the paragraph, and I'll ask administration to give a quick overview of how we project assessment growth. What I'm really interested in this 25% discount that we've applied here. So maybe my first question will be just to administration. Can you just explain how we come up with that $1 million number?
Mr. DeBlanco, if you
Yes.
please.
Thanks for the question. So every single year, administration meets with our municipal assessor to talk about growth assumptions. Planning and development and finance meet in tandem with them to provide growth assumptions, which is then passed on to the assessor, who provides us with a projection based on what we're seeing in the city. What we do then is take our current tax rate and apply that to the forecasted assessment, and we generate a revenue number. So that revenue number for this year was approximately 1.3 million. Now, there is some risk involved with putting that entire number in the budget. So if come April, we have the finalized assessment and it comes in as lower, let's say in this case, 1.1 million. Now, what we have is a delta of 200,000 that needs to get paid for somehow. So what would have to happen there is, we'll just use a number on the screen, 649, and let's assume for ease of use that it's 255 is the delta now. An additional increase to the tax levy of 1% would need to be applied to cover off that overestimate, we'll call it. So in prior years, what we've seen is the fluctuations in the estimate can range anywhere from +20 to -20. So what we're talking about here is just a question of risk, is how much risk council is willing to take with the estimate. Approve a tax increase in the next couple weeks here. And then if we come back and it happens to be lower than what our estimated growth is, what we'll have to do is, what would be recommended is that taxes would need to be increased. Like that 649 would no longer be 649, it would be 749 in the example I used.
Mm-hmm.
So let me dive on that. You're right. This is a philosophical question about risk. I would challenge you that we'd need to raise taxes to be able to meet that. I think there could be some operational savings that could find that. Your job is to be risk averse. I get it, and I appreciate and thank you for it. But for me personally, I think this is somewhere where we could look to come in at the growth number that was initially put in here. Administration brought that down 25%. I'm nothing against you, and please don't take this the wrong way. I think we could potentially be kind of overtaxing initially, and then kind of bringing up that delta with a surplus. So my recommendation here to have this discussion on the idea is to basically effectively take out that discount and recommend that we increase the project assessment growth to back where it was. Therefore, and this is a negative, which is a positive, right?
Yep.
So that's going to help reduce the 6.49 number, and Curtis will show what that does from the delta. But my sense here with this one, and ask council to weigh in on this, is that this is the appropriate number to come in at. And if assessment growth comes in a little bit lower than that, then we'll find that those synergies through operations and potentially the surplus throughout the year. So that's just my philosophy on it. I'd rather get the tax rate as low as we can here and see where we go. So I'll open that up for discussion. I do have a potential motion. Can I say that? I do have a potential motion that is ready to go, but I'll leave it for people who have questions first before we put the motion on the floor.
So Sam, just to clarify, then you're suggesting 1 million becomes 1.250, 25%. Just so we're clear with what further discussion purposes here, Sam?
Yeah, I think you said 300,000, but at 25%, I thought 250,000, but I'm not going to check you. So my thoughts was 250,000.
Slightly below, yeah, just, I thought, that's what I thought you meant, but then we talked about potentially 3, so, okay. So the discussion on the table, sorry, not the table before us is looking at potentially increasing the projected assessment growth, which again is a negative becomes a positive in terms of in terms of cash. It gets our 6.49 down somewhat about roughly 1% at 250. Mr. DeBlanco, do you wish, oh, your mic's on, sir. Okay, that's okay. I thought I put it on for you. Mr. Telebus, Nathan, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just want to speak to that potential motion. In regards to the fact that we're playing with numbers here. I will lean more towards the financial side and be risk adverse and take the approach that we've taken so that we're not potentially either increasing taxes down the road or having a scramble to try and find funds. Just to confirm, Mr. DeBlanco, if we're going that route, we're assuming that we're getting 100% growth or close to it, and everything's perfect.
Mr. DeBlanco.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, we would be nearing up into the 90% range. Just some context here, I think council should be aware of. The assessor estimate last year was just based on what was presented in the fall was approximately 980,000. We took this approach of discounting last year and put approximately 800,000 in the budget, and it came in right at 800,000. So that was, in that case, we were lower last year. So if we would have taken this approach last year and budgeted for 100%, we would have ended up having the negative situation I described before. Now, in prior years, we had the opposite effect. So like I said, there's that plus minus 20%. It's a question of risk averse. But to answer your question with I'll just give me 1 second here.
Can you speak to that?
With the 250,000, we'd be at 94%.
Thank you. I guess just continuing on with that, I would much rather have some money in my pocket than digging in my pockets. Personally, I think we need to find alternate avenues as opposed to playing with numbers where we get confirmation of additional revenue coming in, and that's something we continue to explore and discuss. Yeah, I unfortunately won't be able to support that motion just because of the potential risk that comes with it.
Thank you, Councillor. Quick question before we go any further. I'll go back to Sam, you have your question up. So, Madam Clerk, just on this procedural thing, because it's a motion, it may be a motion instead of a
I can make the
conversation.
motion. I think it's easier just to make it.
Did you want to make the motion? Okay.
Then it's on the table and we make
Sure,
this nice and
let's do
clean.
that.
I'll move that the proposed 2024 municipal operating budget be amended by increasing the assessment growth revenue by 250,000 from 1 million to 1.25 million. A couple of comments on that. So Mr. DeBlanco, you spoke about last year where you came at 100,000, and if you didn't, there was that 100,000 shortfall. But you also mentioned, and I'll just stress in previous years, we've come above that, right? And so your comment around like to keep money in the kitty, I would rather keep that in residents' pockets than our city coffers. We thankfully haven't had much snow this year, and so there is an opportunity there to use some of those. So I've heard from Mr. Blanco, and I respect that. I'll be curious from a risk perspective, Mr. Dowler, Mr. Schwartz, just your view on this, just from a risk perspective. So I'll start with Mr. Schwartz. Just get your sense on this.
CEO Schwartz.
Yeah, and as finance is laying out, they're laying out the facts and that there is a risk here. We had a discussion earlier about, how big is that risk? And you make the comment about operational opportunities. We'll have about 8 months to do that. And we have seen this year that we have a surplus. You'll notice that I'm 2 seats over so that Mr. Dowler can't kick me. The risk is, it's there. It has to be presented. How high it is, I'm not sure that's that high. For $200,000 over a $50 million budget, I think we have some opportunity.
Exactly. That was going to be my final point here. $250,000 over a significantly sized budget. This is an opportunity here to reduce the tax levy that we're asking people to take from, worst case scenario, we need to increase those taxes that we were going to do today anyway. So best case scenario, we hit that assessment growth. Medium case, they find it in operational efficiencies. I would rather not take the money out of their pocket right away. I did ask Mr. Dow if you wanted to share anything, so I'd be curious on your point, on your thoughts around this, the risk level around this.
Mr. Dowler.
Yeah, I think everybody's covered a lot of the risks side of this. What I would just also add to the risk piece is, really it's a risk from an administrative standpoint. And so the last thing administration wants to do is sit in front of council come April when we're trying to finalize the tax rate bylaw and say, hey, by the way, one of the estimates that we built into the budget is now wrong, or we've determined that it's under. And in order to adjust and it still achieve your approved budget back in December, we need to reduce expenditures or increase the tax rate. So from a risk perspective, it really is, without any conversation in front of council, it's really an administrative risk that we're trying to address. The fact that council's having the conversation and is willing to kind of push the envelope, so to speak, on that estimate. I think it's a good conversation to have as council. And if you're willing to take that risk, it's a manageable risk, I would say, at this point in time.
Okay, I've got a low and manageable and a not recommended. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So, other members of council, nothing just yet. So I will just pop in for a moment here. I like being creative when we can within a certain amount of risk. And I think that risk mitigation is not that difficult here on this idea. I know it's only 50 grand, but I'd be more comfortable with 1.2 instead of 1.25. It's just a smaller number. It's not a big deal, but I know just running our number 1.2, and it gives us some wiggle room to look at potentially, sorry, I hate the word wiggle room, sorry. Gives us a little more capacity to look at some other unfunded opportunities such as the library board. We have discussion from them this evening that's unfunded. This finds us a way to get some of those things into the operating budget for this year. So I'm inclined to support the motion. I would not yet ask you for a friendly amendment at 1.2. I'm not there yet. I'm just thinking speaking out loud. Other councils do want to speak, so I'll just let them go ahead. Councilor Cook, Kat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I lean a little bit on the risk averse side of things as well. However, I do see Councillor Monkoff-Swain's points. But I do definitely take in Mr. DeBlanco and Mr. Dollar's points as well as coming back later. What does that look like? Potentially, we don't go the full 1.25. Maybe we do 150,000. I know this doesn't seem like a lot and it seems like nickel and diming. But I guess it's just comfort. And to me, when I hear that, what was it, 93% is what we were kind of closer. That is where it makes me a little bit more nervous. So that's where my thoughts are on that.
Thank you, Councillor. CEO Schwartz, what's to jump in before I go to Councillor Van Nieuwkerk, followed by Councillor Penrod. CEO Schwartz.
Yeah, I certainly admire the discussion around risk, and I don't want for you to think for a second that we're risk averse. Either it's a yes or a no. I think what we heard here at the comment was just that the risk is low, but the rules and the how we operate don't recommend you do it. Well, we do a lot of things that are not recommended to do. In my comment, I just wanted to reiterate it again because I'm not trying to coerce you here. I just want to assess the risk. We've got a $50-some million budget. If the growth comes in lower, I'm confident we have some opportunity to catch that up, and that we're not going to come back to council in the spring and say we need a subsequent tax increase. We've never done that, nor do I see us doing that in the future.
Thank you, CEO Schwartz. Councillor Van Nieuwkerk, followed by Councillor Penrod, followed by Councillor Natelibus. Stephen, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just kind of sitting back here. I had a lot to say at the beginning, so I'm just kind of soaking it in a bit. And here's kind of my assessment on this one. I see our planning and development department flooded. I see our inspectors out there flooded. I see asks for more from the builders and developers every day. And I'll ask administration if they see that slowing down, and I don't think I'm going to hear a no. Or sorry, I don't think we're going to hear that it's going to slow down. Did a lot of work in the last 2 years in the municipality and on the municipality for this growth and regional housing starts, which are shared often amongst the region, championed by Councillor Houston out of Spruce Grove most times. Thank you to him for that. I wait for his graphs monthly. So for me, I'm a yes on this one, and I think that it'll be okay. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
So you're a yes?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. I didn't quite hear you.
Yeah. And then the last thought, Mayor, would just be, the Councillor Malkoff Swain hit on the overtax people, and that's definitely somewhere that, that this could be. If we want to get down to a tax narrative, we can get there, so there's that piece of it as well. But I don't see anything slowing down in Beaumont. I see everything coming on harder and faster. The demand is more and more for houses, for people moving here, for residents. How many people come here for a soccer tournament and end up moving here? More than we understand. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate the last comment, especially. Our growth is just phenomenal. Everyone's lived in Beaumont. It's a great place to be. Councillor Penrod, followed by Councillor Telebas. Philip, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mayor Donald. So I just wanted to reiterate what I heard there is that the variance, and this has already been said, but it's what sticks with me as I make this decision. The variance can be plus 20% or minus 20%. And we've lived through years where it was minus 20%. That's how we know it can be that. We've lived through years where it's plus 20, and that's how we know it can be that. So there would be a way to look at it to say actually kind of aiming in the middle with the actual recommended number of 1.3, it would actually be a pretty reasonable. If anything, I would see the number that we budgeted of 1 million as more than conservative. And so the other piece I'll add to it is I tried to save us a little bit of money on the expenses side, wasn't successful in doing that. So I feel like I'm constrained if I want to have some of the money to do some of the other work I feel strongly needs to happen. Then I would need to look for the full amount here. So I'll be voting for the motion as proposed.
Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate that. Councilman Telebas, followed by Councillor Barnhart. Nathan, you have the floor.
Perfect, thank you. I just want to clarify, we're looking at a theoretical number, so it's not similar to what you proposed. It's much like me looking at this, the budget, and we're looking at paying $75,000 for a half ton. So I could sit there and say we might get that for 55,000. So let's save 20 grand there. But I don't think it's the appropriate thing to do. We want to be cautious and we want to be transparent and we want to be safe. We don't want to be chasing $250,000 down the road, even if maybe we could scramble and cover it. Obviously we have these numbers and we've seen if history repeats itself from last year, we're going to be at a loss. And that's my concern with making up these numbers and hoping for the best case scenario, which isn't always the case.
Thank you, Councillor. Well said. So your position, I do appreciate that. Councillor Barnhart. Kathy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just coming in on wrap up here. I think I pretty much have heard and agree with most of the comments that were made about going this route. Why I do think I don't even think I would call it a risk as much as I would call it a decision as to whether we charge the ratepayer for this estimate at this time, or if we look at other expenses and other ways that we can trim the budget. And I think Mr. Swartz has told us that he feels we can cover this if it goes up to the 1.25. So I just really feel that this is the prudent way to go from a taxpayer's perspective, from the setting the mill rate. And I don't think it's a matter of us taking a huge risk. I think we know from past history that this is a reasonable risk to take, reasonable budget. And budgets, in my experience, are our best estimate But when we have choices as to how much of a percentage of our assessment growth, I would agree with the other counselors that what I can see all around is that we're growing at a phenomenal rate. And that's, I don't know exactly how that translates into whether it's 1 million or 1.25, but I know that it's going to be high. I think we are doing extremely well, and I just think we have to keep going that way. And if we have to increase taxes in spring, we'll do that, I'm sure, but I think there's other ways to manage it at that time. So I'll be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Counselor. See if other comments willing to speak. Sam, do you want to have one last comment on your motion before I call for the vote? Seeing none. All right, councillors, I will ask you to vote on the motion on the screen before you. Thank you, council. That carries 6-1. Councillor Natelibus, no. The other 6 councillors or members of council, pardon me, have voted yes. That carries 6-1. Thank you, council. Mr. Blanco, are we able to indicate the actual, I'm assuming being 250,000, 1% being 250,000, so essentially 6.49 has now become 5.49 effectively. Would you agree with that without having to go to our sheet? Oh, hang on a second. Mr. Blanco?
I believe the clerk can put it on the screen in a minute here, but since it's not precisely 1%, it's 0.98. It is the bottom line now is 5.51.
5.51. Thank you. We'll have a running total there as we did in the previous years. Help us understand where we're at as we move things along. All right. This concludes page 12, as we talked about. At this point, I will open the floor to discussions on members of council on other ways to look at the operating budget in terms of suggestions on how to make things different. And then we'll also, as we get going forward tonight, also entertain at this point any unfunded opportunities that may require funding if we vote for it that'll affect the operating budget. So just so we're clear, we were at 6.49. We are now at 5.51. If I remember Mr. Blanco being specific, that's where we are right now with the package you have seen before you. So at that point, open the floor to discussion from council, as I mentioned a moment ago. Councilor McGough-Swain, you have the floor.
Yeah, another attempt here to see if we can get that tax levy down. So I'll direct council to page 40 of our budget package. Looking at our government grants. Not sure what it is for the PDF page. Sorry.
Page 40.
Page 40 on your budget document. So top right, yellow number,
Yes.
white number. Yeah. So scroll down. Sorry, Sandy or Stacy, whoever's.
I've got page 40. Yeah.
Yeah.
Deferred revenue, top of page 40.
Yeah. So
Yeah, there we go.
you could zoom in on the table down the bottom. Thank you. So time for our annual conversation about pay as you go. I really hope it's not as painful as previous years. So I'll ask you to give Curtis, I'll ask you to give just a brief wrap up of what pay as you go is and how that impacts the tax levy rate. And thank you for sending that in advance, but just so the public can hear what pay as you go is.
Mr. Blanco, you have the floor.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So pay as you go is an allocation from the municipal operating budget to act as a funding source that makes it easy for the city to fund really smaller one-time projects. The majority of the time it is the capital budget, and it's for smaller pieces of equipment that, you know, the administrative burden to put together a grant proposal for a piece that's 17,000 doesn't make a ton of sense. And in a lot of cases, these grant programs have minimum thresholds in order to submit a project for. So that's what the flexibility of pay as you go allows administration to use it as a funding source for these smaller projects. It is funded by the tax levy, and then it goes into, it is truly from an accounting standpoint, it goes into a reserve and is drawn from like a reserve. But in the manner it's presented on the screen is much like a government transfer from the city of Beaumont to the city of Beaumont. It's used in the growth funding pool in a similar manner to MSI, in a similar manner to the Canada Community Building Fund. What we see is in the current year, and this is mostly driven from some of the operating reserve balances, is that it's been used to fund one-time projects in operating to the tune of 700,600 and one-time capital purchases for 212,500.
Thank you for that. That was fantastic. So what I see here in front of me is a 900,000 allocation here. I understand the transfer to operating budget at 700,000. I get that. That makes a lot of sense. What I'm looking to do here is discuss an idea to find some efficiencies and really essentially reduce that pay-as-you-go contribution from 900,000 down to 700,000. And so that would give us a positive $200,000 towards our overall assessment here. And so that is the discussion that I would like to have. And actually, I'll just make the motion here, Ms. Bajaya, if you're ready. If that's okay, just to
Yes.
get it on the table.
Yep, that'll smooth things along nicely. I'm fine with that, Sam. Thanks.
So I'll move that the proposed 2024 municipal budget be amended by decreasing the contribution to the pay-as-you-go fund in the amount of 200,000 from 900,000 to 700,000. I recognize the value of this fund here. We've got the largest proposed tax increase in front of us for a long time. I don't think this is the year to go all in or to top that up. So by doing this still covers the operating projects. And administration can use other capital grants for those capital projects that were listed there. So that is my approach here. I'll leave it at that. I think that's relatively straightforward, but happy to answer questions, and I'll jump in if people have questions on that later on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr. Blanco. Questions from members of council? I will start with Councillor Barnhart, followed by Councillor Penrod. Kathy?
Thank you
have
very
the
much.
floor.
No questions for Councillor McGough-Swain. I'm glad you were able to see how to do that. I have it circled, but I couldn't figure out. I really get lost on pay as you go. That's why it keeps coming back every year.
Yeah.
But the question I would like to ask the administration is, what that $200,000 came out of this year's allocation, what would be the impact of that?
Mr. DeBlanco, if you could please, or Mr. Dowler, whichever you prefer.
I can take a crack at it, and then if I miss anything, Mr. Dowler will let us know. One thing is that as it is a reduction that is coming from a tax levy funding source, that in order to get that allocation back to the amount it's currently at would require a tax increase.
Later.
Yeah, in a future year, correct. The approach that was laid out in March of last year was a plan to get the funding source to a level that would be recommended, that would be ideal, that would reduce the reliance on these other grants. And that was and in that report that was presented in March was an approach to increase it by $200,000 a year. This year in the proposed budget, there isn't an increase of 200,000. The only amount that's increased is an amount that is the debt service that fell off. So the city saw approximately, don't quote me on this, approximately $92,000 to $93,000 of debt service that fell off. And one of the approaches recommended in that report was anytime debt falls off of the city's books, that amount dedicated to that gets forwarded to pay as you go. And what that does is keep the capital envelope that's available to the city complete. So there isn't truly an increase of the capital envelope. This is just debt service falling off, being allocated to pay as you go, which brings it up to the $900,000 number. The other impact is on the capital budget, and that's the ability to fund these smaller projects. The MSI and CCBF each have individual program guidelines that some are rigid, some capital projects qualify for some qualify for other. Pay as you go provides a funding source that doesn't have any program guidelines other than what council directs. So it becomes a very flexible mechanism to fund these smaller projects.
So no real noticeable impact except on the books. In other words, it's an account we're keeping for ourselves to use when we need it. Is that what I'm hearing? Like there's no project that's not going to go ahead because we took 200,000 out.
I wouldn't say that exactly. There is 212,000 in capital projects funded in the proposed budget that we would need to find an alternative funding source for.
Or they could be postponed or delayed or pushed forward.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. You're done. Thank you. Councillor Penrod, followed by Councillor Telebus. Philip? You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Kathy, you're nicer than I am. Rather than ask the question to administration, I put the question to Councillor Monkoff Swain. Say, this takes me back to my days as a math tutor. You don't know how much I love this. Show your work. Where do you find that? If I, to be less cheeky about it, I think you're saying, let's take that money from other government transfers as opposed to pay as you go, but take me through it.
Councillor Monkoff Swain, please.
Yeah, first of all, as you're probably aware, I failed every math class. So thanks for putting me on the spot here. But so first I will say, every year we ask what projects in here are pay as you go, what are government transfers, what are federal, provincial, right? And I get the response always comes back, we don't know. What I'm hearing is that we do know. There are little projects in here that we do. So it would have been helpful to have that. But what I will say is, basically, I'm asking administration to find that 200, and maybe if we could put that table back up, sorry, just so I can speak to it and everyone can see. The 200,000 that's in capital in the transfer to capital budget. I'm asking administration if they really want those capital projects to find those through either provincial or federal grants. This money is you're paying yourself to pay yourself, and when administration brings forward a 6.49% budget, there are going to be things that we need to be tight on. And this year, I think this is a prudent way to save $200,000 off the taxpayer. Administration can find that another way, and so this is way to reduce that 6.49%.
Councillor Penrod, do you wish to ask a clarifying question of Councillor Monkoff Swain? Any further? You have the floor if you need it.
Yeah, so just to make the point, I think, again, I don't disagree with what you've proposed. I'm leaning towards voting in favor of it. But I just want to make it clear that there's no such thing as found money here, right? So we're in this situation where we've got immense pressures in our budget across the community and into the future. I really appreciated what Councillor McCook said earlier, that you can't just kind of keep kicking the ball down the road for people. If you treat it year by year, every year is a hard year. Every year has hardships, every year has pressures. So we do also have this issue of needing to build up our reserves. And this is a reserve that we're intentionally trying to build up because it meets a very particular need, and it frees us up to be creative and to push the envelope, especially when our provincial partners let us down. And if there's any kind of public message that I would like to give, and that I will beat that drum over and over, anyone that wants to take me up on going for a coffee, it's that the province continues to hold us to account and give us immense responsibilities and tie our hands behind our backs around what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do in order to achieve those responsibilities that are really their responsibilities. But then they don't follow through with the funding. So people like to say that there's only one taxpayer, and that's 100% true. I don't know that we need to tie ourselves in knots continually to keep the municipal tax rate at the absolute lowest possible, just to continue to enable fiscally irresponsible behavior at the provincial level. And that's all I'll say about that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Monkoff Swain, do you want to just have a chat back before I go to Councillor Telebus? Sam?
Yeah, I'll try not to take that bait, but thank you. And just for the record, I think it's about a 30% decrease in grant funding that used to come from the province to us. And so I know Tyler and the team at AB municipalities are advocating for that, and that's a very real point. So what I would say is I'm with you on that long-term outlook. I spoke to that earlier on in my fiscal responsibility conversation earlier. What I would say is when we're presenting a budget that is proposed to be over inflation, which this one is, then, that's where we need to really dive in and find those efficiencies. I would, if we had this budget coming in at inflation, and I know why it is where it is, but if we had this coming in at inflation, then I would support the policy that puts in that additional money to build out that specific reserve, or that specific grant funding stream. We're coming over, we've got to find ways to reduce this tax burden on ratepayers here. And so in this particular year, because we're over, that's why I think it's prudent in this time.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Telebas. Nathan, you have the floor.
Thank you. I guess we can run into some analogies here. I think what we're looking at here is stealing from Peter to give to Paul, and we hope it doesn't rain. Is kind of what we're looking at here. I do have a question though in regards to obviously the debt service drop off being applied to the pay as you go. I know I'm looking forward. Mr. Blanco, do you roughly know off the top of your head a rough number for 2025 or even 2026 as to what we could anticipate for debt drop off and then potential allocation of those funds to pay as you go? I know it's looking forward, but
Mr. Blanco,
Thanks for the question.
take your time.
Yep, I could pull up a more detailed report, but it is on page 42. And what we see is the next time debt drops off is not until 2028. So I'll give you some time to get to page 42 of the budget document. What we can see is it's the second table, or I'll wait till it's up on the screen. The second table on the screen there, we can see a total amount on the right-hand column of debt service. And that's just based on the balances of debt we currently have in the repayment schedules. We see a total of 3.4 million for years 2024 through 2027. And then we see that amount go down to 3.1 million in 2028. So that indicates that's the year the next debt drop off is.
okay, perfect. Thank you. So assuming we don't incur any more debt, it wouldn't be until 2028 when we could actually apply, or at least if we're following our principle there, apply that savings to this fund, correct?
From that approach, and there's a few approaches around increasing the pay-as-you-go amount to minimize the impact on taxes. The applying any debt service that falls off is one of them. Another could be this wouldn't minimize the tax increase, but applying it to the taxes, among other things. There are a few, I don't recall them off the top of my head, but there's a few approaches that were presented in that March report.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate that. Any further questions, members of council? Councillor McCook, followed by Councillor Newkirk, and followed by me. Kat, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I guess my concern is to Councillor Penrod's point, our reserves are low, so we're looking to pull more from reserves while also lowering pay as you go. And I think that kind of speaks to pushing things down the road. So I would say that that's where my concern with this goes is, at some point, we will likely have to raise pay as you go again. And so, yeah, it feels like we're just kicking it down the road a little bit in regards to that. So that's my concern with what's in front of us.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newkirk, Stephen, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Again, just trying to soak it in. Wasn't long ago we didn't have pay as you go. Wasn't here. It was a concept. There was a budget that was in front of us that Mr. Dollar concepted the idea of pay as you go. The budget after that, we saw some numbers go into it, and those numbers are money. And then we saw some more go into it, and now we're seeing some more proposed to go into it. It's a tool that's been put together and introduced for all the right reasons. Whether or not that balance was 200 or 300 right now is based upon the decisions we made 2 budgets ago. Here we're faced with a question about funding that new reserve in its proposed manner, or looking to support this motion of reducing the proposed manner by 200,000. To be frank with council, we're running out of levers to move 6.49 down. So if we vote against this motion, I'm looking to fellow councilors to come up with some ideas on how we're going to do that, because we're running pretty skinny on those. So all ears. I think this is an idea that has merit, and I'll support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Bear with me if you don't mind, Mr. DeBlanco, if you could just dumb it down for me, as the saying goes. So on the pay-as-you-go, the current year allocation of 900,000, that $900,000 is money coming from the 6.49% tax levy increase, correct? Mr. Blanco?
I'll answer what I believe the intent of the question is. So the 900,000 is funded by tax levy. Yes.
Right.
The increased amount, it was 8 and change. It's now 9. That's just a reallocation of debt service.
Okay.
So it's not driving any increase to the tax levy to the 6.49,
Right.
but it is being funded by taxes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. To Stephen's point a moment ago about how having pay-as-you-go a couple years ago, again, it's a great mechanism. Mr. Dollar brought it a few years ago, and it's a good mechanism. It has a purpose in our budget. Question is, do we need that much money in pay-as-you-go? To Sam's point about bringing it down by 200,000, do we really need 900,000 pay-as-you-go? That's a loaded question. I get that. I'm trying to get my head around the utility use of the reserve that's there. If we really need it, great. If it's funded on the high side, we don't really need it. Can it be adjusted? I'm trying to get my head around Sam's motion and just the idea of how big pay-as-you-go needs to be. Can you try to help me with that as best you can?
Sure. And I'm going to allude back to that March report, and Mr. Dowler might help me. There was a review or an analysis done at the time. Don't quote me on the year, but approximately 2015 to 2017, when the city was looking at annexation. At the time, and part of that review, there was a recommendation that the city have a funding source, and I'm not certain if it was called pay-as-you-go, but a pay-as-you-go type funding source appropriate for the size of the city would be funded to the tune of $2 million. So just based on the recommendation from that report, it would indicate that we're currently underfunded in terms of the pay-as-you-go funding source. That's the only data I have to support that, but that is would indicate that this is underfunded.
Underfunded. Okay, thanks, Mr. Blanco. Appreciate that. And Michael Swain. Sam?
Yeah, let me just reinforce that. That number, $2 million was a number that we came up with, right? And so yes, underfunded, but it's not, just want to be clear, it's not reserves. We're not taking anything out of reserves. Reserves very specific in here for things like technology replacement, facility renewal, utilities, et cetera. Like that is important. We're not taking anything out of those reserves, just to be clear. What we're saying here is we've got this ideal world of getting to 2 million, and I hope we get there. I just don't think this is a year when we've got a 6.49% tax increase in front of us that we need to get there. So yeah, I think this is prudent. And this year we're not taking anything from reserves. Doesn't touch the reserves. This is just purely our own grant that we're paying ourselves into. And I'm just saying that we're going to take a little bit longer to get to that $2 million, given the financial challenge that we have in front of us.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Cook. Kat, you have the floor.
If there are projects that need to be done and were previously planned for pay-as-you-go, do we not then have to dip into reserves?
Mr. Blanco?
I'll answer this as best I can. It's a funding question. Just to answer the question, the 212 isn't allocated to anything. That's the residual balance that goes to the pool for capital. Once we get through the capital budget and have an amount of projects, then we'll look at which ones could be funded from a pay-as-you-go source versus an MSI source versus CCBC or CCBF source. The reserves, the capital reserves specifically, are allocated for renewal projects, whereas the funding sources on the screen are for growth projects. And that's just a fundamental principle to make sure that we're not paying for renewal with grants that we can't rely on in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. That helped.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further? Oh, right off the top, Councillor Telebus. Nathan? We'll go to round two, kind of half round three here. Keep going.
Perfect. Yeah, no, thank you. I just think it's important that we understand
Yep.
either the importance or unimportance of this fund here. So based on its usage last year, are you able to describe, I guess, some consequence had we not had that 800 and some available, or anyone within administration, I guess, for that fact?
Mr. DeBlanco. Go.
Sure, thanks for the question. Once again, it just comes back to flexibility and the smaller projects that were funded in last year's budget. I'm just looking at a list of small projects that'll be funded from pay-as-you-go, things like a rolling bridge jack for $8,000, heavy-duty scales for $30,000. These are amounts that it would be difficult to fund from these larger grants, so it just provides flexibility. We had, I'm not going to count them here, but approximately 10 to 12 individual little projects that may be too small for other grants, and if they weren't, just putting together a submission for a $13,000 piece of equipment's burdensome administratively. It just provides much less flexibility when we only have larger grant funding and then reserves. So.
Perfect. Thank you. I do have to comment and say great work. You must have a cheat sheet there that you can flip over and all around, because you're answering pretty quick. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Just give me 1 second here. I got a couple messages coming across my thing here. Okay, perfect. I'm seeing no further questions from members of council on this particular issue, on the motion before us here. Pardon me. See no further questions. Councillor Muckhouse-Swain, is your motion? Do you have a final comment you wish to make before I call for the vote on the motion? No, you're good? Okay, council. With that, I'll ask you to vote for the motion on the screen before you. Thank you, council. That carries unanimously, 7-0. Thank you. So Mr. DeBlanco, if you wouldn't mind, this additional 200,000, I believe, will have a positive effect on the tax levy. Mr. Blanco, yes, thank you.
Yeah, so with the two approved motions, the tax levy amended municipal tax increase is now 4.72%.
4.72%. Okay. All right. Thank you, council. So at this point, it's 8:41. I would like to have us stop around 9 o'clock, if that's okay. Question from council is, we could continue on with potentially discussing some unfunded potential additions to the operating budget, as I mentioned before, such as library, such as transit, such as childcare and that sort of thing. So we could begin with a discussion on that this evening, or we could curtail this evening, come back at 6 tomorrow night and begin that conversation and finish off capital utility tomorrow. And we should be wrapped up by tomorrow night. I'll take some consensus from council administration. Your time is valuable, of course, and it's been 2 heavy nights in a row already. So I would sort of be inclined to go till 9. Yeah, 9 is a projected stop time. Yeah, yeah, we did say 6 to 9 are pretty regular on communication, so that's okay. I blocked 10 o'clock myself, my calendar. So council, do you want to maybe just take the break this evening and come back tomorrow and start talking about unfunded options to continue, or just go on till 9, which I'm good with. I just want to get some consensus here, so we're on track. All right, let's continue. I will now entertain discussions from council members on potentially unfunded opportunities that will affect the operating budget, and I'll open up the floor to our first discussion. Nathan?
Before we do that, could I ask some questions?
Yes, let's get back to that. So yeah, Councillor Montalbus has a couple of questions that we want to make sure we answer for him before we go any further in our budget discussion. So Nathan, when you were ready, please ask your first question or two, and we'll make sure we get them answered for you. Your mic is on now.
And thank you.
No problem.
And if I'm out of line and need to ask this at a different point, please get me back in line, both administration and yourself,
Okay.
Mayor. Just a question in regards to status of our CO2 tank here at the rec center. I'm not sure who would answer that. But the answer I received, so basically that we need to relocate our CO2 tank. And I'm quoted a bunch of codes, which I'm quite familiar with. But my understanding would be that we'd be grandfathered to continue to have this CO2 tank in its current location. Given if we obviously have the right corrective measures in to help protect everyone from a potential hazard. My understanding is that this tank is in good condition and does not pose any immediate threat. So I believe it had a price tag of around 200,000 to relocate it. I just looking for some clarification there. And I'm not sure who in administration would address that.
Trying to find something here myself. Where did I put it? Yeah. I think that's capital, but
Yeah.
if we're not sure.
Yep.
CO Schwartz, you want to help us out there?
Yeah, we don't have the safety codes folks here to be able to answer that offhand, but we can definitely get an answer by tomorrow night. My understanding is we're moving into capital then.
Okay. And I guess just tying into that question, if we're going to be asking that group, I do have a little bit of knowledge in safety here, and tying into that is also, I believe they referred to them. Sorry here. It's just the fall protection to protect individuals. They refer to it as hatch netting. Now, I'm familiar with hatch netting. It's a relatively new concept. But that comes with a decent price tag too, where there's other alternatives such as an SRL system we could use, which would come at a tenth of the cost. So again, I guess for another group, but I think it's important in a cost savings approach.
Thank you. CO Schwartz, sorry, my microphone hit the button, didn't work.
I'm gonna throw out a caution here, and then I'm gonna get smacked by Legend Services, so I'm gonna take that risk. As a counselor, when you sit up at that desk, your previous professional experience doesn't really count a lot. We appreciate the suggestion, and we will look into it. But be careful that you don't cross the line that you're making a motion for, or you're suggesting that we should be doing something differently, because you don't have the protection that we do. You know, we've got safety codes officers that are trained and certified and follow those codes. So it's a caution. I get what you're saying, and people bring that expertise into the council chambers, but that's not your role. That said, I'm also not the smartest person in the world, so I will take a suggestion, and I thank you for those, and we will run those through our safety codes folks. So it's just a friendly caution.
Counselor? You're good? Any?
I'd like to speak to that.
Yeah. You have the floor.
Thank you. Although I do appreciate those comments, I'm not tying necessarily back to my expertise, general knowledge within anything. And I believe we have the right to propose alternatives when we see fit, especially if it's a cost saving approach, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions you wanted to touch base? Make sure we didn't miss anything. Or we move forward.
You can go ahead and move forward.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay. Members of council. Anything you want to bring from unfunded?
You want to start with that?
We can, yeah. In fact, I can start with the library. Sorry?
Okay.
I thought I'd start with library, but if you want to start childcare?
Want to flip forward?
Let's start library. Let's start library. Okay.
Library, because library's here.
Yes. Council, if you'll join me, please, council, in the back of your Serving the Citizens package on page 118, hard copy of the proposed budget, it does show the 94,500 library requests as presented earlier this evening. Based on the questions provided back from Mr. DeBlanco, that corresponds to a 0.4% addition to the operating budget. Now, we are currently sitting at, my notes here says we're at 4.72. Mr. DeBlanco, is that correct? 4.72? Thank you very much. I would like to speak. I will make a motion then, if I could, Madam Clerk, that council would approve the request of the library as per page 118. If you can make it sound better than I just said, we'll take a moment, if you don't mind, on that, allow you to just wordsmith that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'll just read it quickly myself before I say. Yes, I believe that's accurate. Thank you. I will move that the proposed 2024 municipal operating budget be amended by increasing the municipal grant funding to the Beaumont Municipal Library in the amount of 94,550 from 1.116150 million to 1.210700 for the purpose of various program enhancements as set out on page 117 of the 2024 proposed budget item 3.1 and be funded from the tax levy. I will speak to my motion briefly. We had a presentation this evening from the library, very thorough presentation. The library, in my opinion, does a very good job of the funds they get from us. They stretch every dollar they possibly can, and they're very creative with how they spend money at the library. The library is undersized for our population, and the library, as we noted this evening, has almost half our population as memberships, which to me is a phenomenal penetration in our population for membership. So I'm supportive of this motion to help the library continue to do the good work it does for our community, as outlined by the presentation earlier this evening. With that, I will open the conversation to members of council with questions, concerns, or opinions on this particular motion, please. Councillor Telbus, Nathan, you have the floor.
Thank you. I guess it'll just sway more to potentially an amendment to the total funding. I do appreciate everything that this service provides, especially to the children within the community and all the groups. But given some of the numbers that we've put into play, some of them more theoretical than others, I would ask that potentially we could make a slight reduction. It does mention it's a very ambitious goal for 2024 and beyond. There is existing funding in place, and I would just like to potentially counter that at 50% of funding, just given our current state of finances.
Thank you, Councillor. I prefer to leave my motion as is, but you're welcome to make a proposed amendment to the motion, and we'll discuss that amendment, vote on it, and then if it passes, that's fine. If it doesn't pass, we'll go back to the original motion.
Okay,
Are you prepared to make that amendment motion?
So just, yeah, prior to moving on, I just want to clarify, very important program, and I look forward to seeing what comes of it. But from a cost saving perspective, I'd like to make the motion to amend that the funding proposed in the motion on the floor be reduced by 50%.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate that. Do you want to speak to your motion any further before I open up the questions from members of council?
No, I think I addressed it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Members of council, do you wish to speak to this amended motion from Councilman Telebus? See no discussion on the motion, on the amending motion. Seeing none, I will ask council to vote on the amending motion proposed by Councillor Telebus. Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button. I apologize. My mistake. Just going to restart the voting. I apologize. Wrong fingers, fat fingers, man. Okay, the voting is now open again. Council, please vote. Thank you, council. That vote is 5 no, 2 yes. Motion is defeated. Yes votes were from Councillor Penrod and Councillor Telebus. No votes were from Councillor Barnhart, myself, Councillor Monkhouse-Swain, Councillor McCook, and Councillor Van Newkirk. Thank you, council. We are now back to the original motion before you. I see no need to speak to it a second time. Are there any members of council wishing to speak on this motion before I call for the vote? Councillor Penrod, followed by Councillor Telebus. Philip, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mayor Daniluk.
You're welcome.
So just to pose you a question, by way of continuing the conversation a little bit, curious as to why you moved to fund this piece, a worthy ask. I'm not actually intending to debate that this is a worthy ask. Just want to put into the mix, though, we have a couple other unfunded pieces that are very similar costs. One would be growth of existing program in protective services that comes in at a 0.6% increase to the levy. And a second on page 128 of the budget, maybe especially germane tonight, given a lot of our conversation around intentions to keep costs in check. That's a program enhancement in finance that comes in at a 0.5%. And in addition to that cost would actually have a recoverable associated with it because it's associated with giving our administration more resources to do procurement well. And the goal there is always to save money down the road. So if you want to speak to that, I'd
Absolutely, I'll
love to hear your
speak to
answer.
it. I have no problem speaking to it at all. Yes, this motion in front of us, I'll speak to. Yes, I have no problem supporting this motion because I've been 7 years on council now. I've watched the library do its work over 7 years, and I am still impressed with how the library manages this money very closely. It provides excellent services. I don't use the library myself very often, but I know many people in the community who do. And despite the electronic age, the library is surprisingly busy with other things besides the internet. They provide a lot of community services for seniors, for children, for single moms. I have the privilege of parking in the parking lot out my window. I see the library being very used. And I appreciate the question. It's a very valid question. It's why we're here. And I'm glad you raised it because I want to justify the position I'm taking on this. Doesn't matter how small the ask is. It's only 0.4. That's not the issue. The issue is why it's important to me that we fund this before the library, because to me, library is I wouldn't call it an essential service, but it's pretty darn close. In our community, I think the library is borderline essential service. I'm very pleased to support it. Thank you. I ask for your support too, if you're comfortable. Thank you. Did that answer your question? As best
Yeah,
can?
I think really it's just, once again, my agenda, if I have one, is to illustrate for folks the amount of juggling that we're doing. And there's not a lot of unworthy asks in front of us, but we're in the position of needing to control the increase of the levy for very real reasons, to respect people's budgets. And those are just the pressures that we get to deal with living in Beaumont, this thriving city.
Your question was a fair one. I hope I gave it a fair answer. Councillor Telebus, followed by Councillor McCook, followed by Councillor Monkhouse-Swain. Nathan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think anyone's disputing the value that comes with a library. It's very evident that it's important to our community. And again, I'll mention the kids as well as the seniors, absolutely everyone. I do tend to align here with Councillor Penrod, just in the sense that if we're trying to reduce our overall burden to our residents in terms of tax levy, we need to find areas where we can even slightly reduce. My initial proposal, although shot down, was an intention to slightly reduce that number so that potentially we could apply it to other areas or other asks within this budget. But yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCook, followed by Councillor Monkhouse-Swain. Kat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm gonna look over here a little bit, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a report we had gotten a while ago, our library is half the size of what it should be for a population of our size. Is that correct numbers? So I think just the amount that they're doing and what they are trying to squeeze into the extremely small space that they have is pretty phenomenal. And to Mayor Danilik's point, I think a library is near a essential service, especially for people who don't have resources. Like it's hard to believe that some people don't have access to internet and computers and stuff like that, but the reality is that that is true. So I would argue that disputing its value is somewhat saying that we don't value what the library is proposing. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCoy-Swain. Sam, you have the floor.
I'll be brief. We had Laura in front of us. You know, what I really loved about this is that, you know, just super creative opportunity to create some positions there for high school staff, high school students to come into staff positions, right? Like great way to get our young community job opportunities, ideas for them, very, very low cost. So I just want to commend you for your creativity and your leadership in the library again, as always, Laura. Happy to support the motion that's in front of us. And really excited to get some of our high school students into the library and get them some job opportunities. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments, members of council? Councillor Telebas, a follow-up, and I'll make my final comment, then we'll call for the vote.
Thank you.
welcome.
Yeah, just to clarify, I'm not backing in my shell here. I am also going to support this. But I do think it's important that we evaluate the cost, and I'm not devaluing it. Councillor McCook, not by any means, but any number could be proposed, right? So it is important that we have this. I will support it, but always looking for that cost savings approach.
Your comments are valid, and I do appreciate them. That's why we're here, to open, honest discussion and presenting all points of view. That's why we're here, and I appreciate it. One last comment before I call for the vote is I did mention, you know, seniors, single moms, kids who use the library. I know some couples and some families in town who are very well off, and they go to the library with their kids because they see value there too. It's not just marginalized people and lower income people, as some may think. It's actually well-off people who also use the library as well. So it speaks to our entire community from the entire gambit. So thank you, everybody, for your comments on this. Appreciate that. With that, I will call for the vote on the motion before you on the library ask. Thank you, Council. That carries unanimously. Thank you, Council. I do appreciate that. It's 9 o'clock. We had a 10 o'clock night last night. Many administration people were here, including council. It was a very late night. Unexpected, but that's how it goes sometimes. We did schedule for 9 o'clock. I'm going to make an executive decision and curtail us 9 o'clock this evening. We'll reconvene back here at 6 o'clock tomorrow night to continue on with the unfunded sections of our operating budget to get into capital utility. 3 hours tomorrow, if we're lucky, by 9. But I will preface the fact that we may go to 9:30 to try and get it all done tomorrow night rather than coming back on Friday. So be prepared for maybe a bit past 9 tomorrow night and try and get it all done tomorrow night, okay? So with that, if council has no major objections, I'm going to adjourn us. Sorry, not adjourn us, recess the meeting, I believe, Madam Clerk, to tomorrow evening, reconvening at 6 p.m. tomorrow night. Thank you all for being here. We had a very good first night. I appreciate everyone's efforts, comments, and honesty in the conversation. That's why we're here. Thank you all. Have a nice evening. See you tomorrow night.